Dzień dobry Państwu, witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie.
Good
Zaczynamy
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another debate under the World in Focus, Warsaw International Gatherings. This time we are meeting online. My name is Piotr Buras, and I am the head of the Warsaw office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Together with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, we are the organizers of today's debate. Today we'd like to talk about a reality check for the geopolitical European Union. We would like to think whether the European Union is a superpower or is about to become a superpower. Who's going to lead this superpower? Germany, or maybe Poland, or maybe France? We are going to talk about the European ambitions post US elections, which are about to happen very soon. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission 1 year ago, when she took her office, she said that the European Commission and the entire EU will be more geopolitical. She did not explain this very clearly, but most probably what she meant was the fact that European Union would be more active, better organized player in the international arena. And the words of Ursula von der Leyen were quite realistic, because a year before, Emmanuel Macron said at Sorbonne that the European Union should become more sovereign. It should have a strategic autonomy. Angela Merkel, following a very unsuccessful summit of G7 in May, said in Trudering that the Europeans needed to take what was going on in the world in their own hands. And Michel, the head of the European Council, said that the strategic independence of Europe is a new project for the coming millennium. It is pretty obvious that the new interest, the pressure towards the international role of the European Union is very much linked to what is going on around Europe. More and more often, what is going on in the world outside the EU has determined the state of the European Union. The EU is more and more defined by what is going on outside, for instance, in the United States, particularly under the rule of Donald Trump, who is following a totally different strategy than the previous presidents. But also this is linked to China and to the situation in China. The core of politics has moved away from Europe. It has concentrated in, for instance, in the Middle East, and Turkey and Russia are very much willing to reign the world. In the past, these countries were meant to become part of the European Union, but in the last debate, the dream about unilateralism of the European Union certainly has not come true and will not come true. If we talk about geopolitical Europe, we do not only talk about security. Today, geopolitics is not only about tanks, armies, but it is also about instruments such as trade politics, competition politics. trade is becoming more and more important. And this is what we would like to talk about with our distinguished guest that I'm about to introduce in a second. Let me begin with Patrycja Sasnal, who's the head of research at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. She's an expert on the Middle East, but not only. She also deals with transatlantic relations and the issues of foreign politics of EU. Another guest is Jana Puglierin, who's the head of the Berlin office and a senior policy fellow for the European Council on Foreign Relations, and who's an expert on security. And last but not least, we have here Gerard Arnold, who's a distinguished French diplomat who served as an ambassador of France to the United States, and who's an active participant of numerous negotiations. He also served as France's permanent representative to the United Nations and took part in negotiations with Iran, for instance. I'm really glad to have you with us today. And let me begin with a question which refers to the quotation from Mark Lenard, who said that Turkey and Russia are taking over after the European Union because of this vacuum that has been created. And let me refer to the latest events. This year has saw lots of important events, for instance, social unrest in Belarus, Alexei Navalny and what happened to him, and also very severe diplomatic or even military conflicts in Eastern Mediterranean, where very severe tensions between Greece and Turkey concerning the boundaries at sea and access to gas deposits in this region. We should also remember about the conflict in Karabakh, which has also been for many years very dangerous place. And let me begin with Jana, and let me ask her where the European Union was. What was the role of the European Union in those conflicts? Because when we have a look at all those tensions, which are of various nature, what is the role of the European Union in those tensions? Was the EU an actor, a player? Was it an important player, or rather a passive observer? And what are the implications for this ambition to be a geopolitical union?
Thank you very much, Piotr. It's a great pleasure to be kind of guest at another ECFR office event. So I feel privileged that you invited me. So when it comes to the EU as a foreign policy actor, I think that we see a lot of unused potential, actually. So 10 years ago, with the Lisbon Treaty coming into force, I think hopes were that this would kind of the reforms that were done 10 years ago and the new positions would lead to the EU becoming a more decisive and more united actor internationally. And unfortunately, these hopes have been premature. So for a lot of reasons, for the fragmentation of external competences, for the member states' skepticism about the added value of the EU as a framework for foreign policy, for a lack of loyalty, a lack of kind of readiness from the member states to hand over foreign policy competences to Brussels, and an ongoing lack of unity. I think the EU has fallen short of the expectations. And so if we kind of recall the big successes of EU foreign policy, I would mention the Iran deal, or kind of the attempt to bring Serbia and Kosovo together for dialogue. But this kind of are successes of the past. And I think instead of kind of doing more and becoming more united, recent events have shown how disunited the EU still is, and how much there is still to do. Kind of take Belarus as one example. The EU has been slow in responding. It has been caught in an actual dilemma. So how to support the Belarusian kind of protests without kind of making things worse for these people on the ground. Kind of for months after the EU leaders have first pledged to impose sanctions against Belarusian officials. That did not happen because Cyprus was blocking the action. So the anonymity principle prevents the EU very often from taking decisive action. That is just one example. Other examples have been, I don't know, Greece and Hungary blocking joint EU statements on human rights violations committed by China. So I think there is clearly a desire to be more geopolitical that is not backed up by deeds. And you see that when you look at Libya, where basically Italy and France have been at each other at opposite ends of the conflict, supporting different parties. You see that now with the Eastern Med and the conflict between Turkey and Greece. You see France and Germany not agreeing on a common line, papering over their conflicts, trying to say, oh, this is kind of, the different means, but we have the same end in our mind. So I think, that if we continue like that, actually, and if we remain so disunited and actually not relevant, I think this is either we are disunited or we are not relevant. We are just not an actor. Like in Syria, I think the EU is just not an actor. She's not. And that's also, I think, when it comes to, I don't know, perception of Russia. I think we don't have a lot of leverage in many conflicts any longer, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis Turkey. And I think if we don't change that very, very soon, then the EU becomes more and more irrelevant. But it's actually a real shame, and that's why I think people like us are advocating the strong role for the EU for such a long time now, because theoretically the EU would be the perfect actor in many conflicts, because it could bring a lot of people to the table, because it has everything it takes for crisis management and also to solve the conflicts, because it can be a truly geopolitical actor if it would just get its act together, which it doesn't at the moment.
Dziękuję bardzo, Jana. Ja chciałbym się zatrzymać na chwilę przy tym.
Thank you, Jana, a lot. And let's talk about this conflict that you mentioned, Jana, between Greece and Turkey. Maybe in Poland there wasn't much coverage of this conflict between Greece and Turkey, but I think that it's a very important topic. So let's stop here for a while. It regards some gas fields in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, and it is a conflict that might be important for the European Union, because these are two very important partners for the European Union: Greece, a member state, and Turkey, an important partner. Also with regard to NATO. And now there is this conflict. It started a few months ago. And now I would like to ask Mr. Ambassador Araud, what's the position of France as regards this conflict between Greece and Turkey? Because France has a very special role when it comes to the common security policy, the strategic autonomy of the European Union. And I cited Macron talking about this, and now we have this impression in Europe that at least in some member states of the European Union, there is this impression that France did not wait until there would be a common European position as regarded this conflict between Greece and Turkey, but instead it acted on its own. And France was trying to play the role of a country supporting Greece quite clearly, and Greece was also setting some ultimatums for Turkey. And my question would be, what would be the right way to achieve unanimity in the European Union? What should be the leadership in the European Union when it comes to foreign policy? How can we avoid the situation in which a member state, one of the member states, is being overactive, which is criticized by the other member states, but at the same time being passive isn't good either, because then you cannot take any actions at all. So that is the question to Mr. Gérard Araud.
Thank you very much. And first, thank you for having invited me. I think I'm skeptical about the geopolitical role of the European Union in the sense of the traditional geopolitics. I guess for two main reasons. The first one is simply the legitimate difference of visions about the interest and the threats that you can have because of our different geography and different history. It's obvious that seen from Lisbon and seen from Helsinki, the threats are not the same. And the histories are quite different. So we have to recognize the legitimacy of, I should say, the difference of approach, difference of vision of foreign policy between the member states. The second obstacle, which is in a sense more serious, and in a sense your question is a good example of what I should see as an obstacle to have a geopolitical role, is in a sense the fact that most of the Western European countries have lived since 1945 in a historical paradise under the American umbrella. So basically a lot of European countries don't want to have dirty hands. They consider that foreign policy is calling for dialogue and sending aid to poor countries. I'm really sorry, but foreign policy has never been that. Foreign policy has always been balance of power. You don't negotiate out of goodwill. You negotiate because you are obliged to do it, because you consider it's your interest. And what happened in the Eastern Mediterranean is the perfect example of this misunderstanding of what is foreign policy, what is geopolitics. Basically, Turkey was bullying Greece and Cyprus. The first question we should raise is, they are member states. They are really gentlemen. They are member states. So they have a right to call for our solidarity. Second part, basically the Northern European countries didn't lift a finger. They didn't care. They didn't consider that Cyprus and Greece was really their problem. They were obsessed by Belarus. So what France did, it's simply, if we had waited for unanimity among the member states, nothing would have happened. The result would have been Europe. I can already draft the text, because I've drafted a lot of them, calling for dialogue, understanding, and restraint. And actually Germany called Greece, Turkey, and France to restraint. No, in such a conflict, the first thing you do is to establish a balance of power. So the balance of power was against Greece. France, by sending military means to Cyprus and to Greece, has re-established a balance of power. And on this basis, after that, you have to negotiate. But that's a way of seeing foreign policy that, unfortunately, again, I repeat, the European Union doesn't want to see it. The European Union doesn't want to see it. I give you an example. The way we are more or less giving the European Union 60% of the world aid to the world aid. You know, it could be an incredible instrument of influence. And try to ask Brussels to do it. They would say, no way. The aid that we are providing, shouldn't be submitted to political considerations. So I should say that first, if you want to give to the European Union a geopolitical role, you have to give up the naivete the naivety of seeing the world as good guys looking for good results, and you know what Brussels loves and which has never existed, win-win solutions. So that's the strong message that I have, and it means that I am quite skeptical about the fact that we could have a united European Union policy. You know, every time the French are doing something in Africa, immediately the Scandinavians are screaming that it's neo-colonial adventures. And I understand that seen from Stockholm, you know, really, what does it mean? But unfortunately, all the threats we are facing, you know, really now all our environment is in flames. The Americans are not going to come to our rescue anymore. So I think that we should wake up to the real world. We are living in a world of carnivores. We are living in a world of predators. So we should adjust our vision of the world. So before having a role, let's try to think about what means being a power.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie ambasadorze.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And I would like to say something which is related to what you were saying. So this new picture of the world and the necessity to adapt to it, and the necessity for Europe to adapt to it. And now a question that will go to Patrycja Sasnal. It regards a region that she knows a lot about. So North Africa and the Middle East. So this is a region. We were already talking about the conflict between Greece and Turkey. Maybe Patrycja wants to make some comments on this as well. But it's a broader problem, because I think that nowadays we have the situation in which the United States of America, as Mr. Ambassador was saying, are reducing their engagement in this part of the world faster, almost slowly, but still, and Europe has to take over the responsibility for its own safety in this region. And the question is, do we have this power, or can we have this power, this potential that Mr. Ambassador was talking about, saying that this power, this potential is necessary to be able to live in this new dangerous world? Is Europe able to have this power, to have this potential? Could Europe be some sort of a, maybe I don't want to use this word policeman, but could the European Union be an actor who is at least able to defend its own interests in that region? Thank you, Piotr. Thank you for inviting me to join this debate. It's a great honor to be able to talk to you about these topics. And before I actually answer your question regarding what the European Union could do in the Middle East and maybe beyond the European East, I would like to refer to what Gérard was saying. The European Union doesn't want this kind of foreign policy which is based on being a superpower, which is based on strength, which is based on seeing the facts as they are. So the European Union is naive and sees the world in an imaginary way, not as it actually is, just as it imagines it to be. But the European Union consists of the member states. It's not a different institution, a separate institution. The European Union can be broken down just to the member states it consists of. And I think that the French policy, which is very important, of course, is something that has some great impact on what Gérard was saying. There is indeed some misunderstanding, because the eastern member states of the European Union are very busy with Belarus. And being so busy with Belarus, these countries did not have enough empathy for what was going on in Greece because of what Turkey was doing. Indeed, I agree with that. This member state, Greece,
który jest częścią Grecji,
saw its borders
został zaatakowany,
threatened.
bo tam Turcja
These
zaczęła
borders were
odwiety
actually being
właśnie przez Turcję.
attacked
No i
because
tu trzeba
Turkey
jasno
was trying
powiedzieć,
to get
myśmy
to the
też
gas
temu
that
się nie przyjrzeli,
was
jako
positioned
Polacy,
there.
jako
And it
Litwini,
was a
jako
major threat for this
Estończycy,
member
pewnie jako
state, and we
Austriacy.
didn't really care about it here in
Ale
Poland
mówiąc
or in the
to, chcę
Baltic
powiedzieć,
states.
że to jest bardzo ważne,
However,
że w
it
Unii
is also
Europejskiej
very
mamy cały czas
important that in the
proces
European Union there
przemielania
is still
tych
this
różnych
process
perspektyw.
going on, this process of
Naszej
mixing
geograficznej
different
perspektywy
perspectives. We have our
wschodniej
geographical
części Europy
perspective of
i
the eastern part of the
południowej
European
czy
Union,
zachodniej
and there is
perspektywy
this other
francuskiej, włoskiej.
perspective of Italy,
I to nie jest
France,
tylko
of the
kwestia
Mediterranean
geografii,
region.
bo jeżeli byłaby
And
to
this is
kwestia
not just
geografii,
about
to
the
Francja
geography.
i Włochy
Otherwise,
prowadziłyby
France
podobną
and
politykę, na przykład
Italy
wobec
would
Libii, a
be
tak nie robią.
doing more or less the same with
I
regard
teraz
to
co Unia
Libya, for
Europejska
example,
może
and this
zrobić?
is clearly
Pozostawiam
not the
kwestię
case. So what can the
jednomyślności,
European Union do?
tego, że powinniśmy występować jako jedno,
Well, we should,
Europa byłaby
of course, speak in one voice, and we would be
jednym
a
z
great
najsilniejszych, o ile nie
superpower
najsilniejszym na
if we
świecie, jeżeli
spoke in
udałoby się
one
nam
voice,
uzyskać
and
jednomyślność
if we
w
had
polityce
this
zagranicznej. Mam nadzieję,
unanimity
że o tym jeszcze porozmawiamy.
when
Ale
it
to
comes
zostawiając na
to
boku.
foreign
Wobec
policy,
Turcji,
but this is
ja
not
się
the case
zgadzam,
right now.
że nie
So let's
zrobiliśmy
just
tego, co
talk
trzeba było
about Turkey.
zrobić.
I
To znaczy,
agree that we did not do what we should
popatrzmy,
have
jak
done.
Rosja zareagowała
Let's
na
look
tureckie zestrzelenie rosyjskiego
at
samolotu
how
nad Syrią.
Russia
Może pamiętacie to
reacted
państwo,
when
to
Turkey
zdaje się
shot down its
2015
airplane
rok.
over Syria.
Rosja
That happened in
momentalnie nałożyła na
2015.
Turcję sankcje. To
Immediately,
były
Russia
sankcje
imposed sanctions on
gospodarcze,
Turkey,
zastopowano
economic
turystykę,
sanctions.
wszystko
The
ustało.
tourism was stopped from Russia
Wystarczył
to
rok.
Turkey.
Telefon
It took
Putina do
them just
Erdoana w
one
czasie
year,
puczu
and Putin
przeciwko
called
Erdoanowi
Erdogan,
i wszystko wróciło na dobre
and
tory.
everything
Nawet
came
teraz,
back
kiedy
to
traci swoich
normal.
żołnierzy Turcja
And
w Syrii,
even right now, when Turkey is
domyślamy
losing
się, że z rąk
its soldiers
rosyjskich
in Syria,
także,
and they
to
must
nie
be
reaguje
shot
tak
by Russian
agresywnie, jak
soldiers,
pewnie by to
and
zrobiła,
still
gdyby
Turkey is not
Rosja nie
reacting in
pokazała
such an aggressive
swojej
way
mocy wobec Turcji.
in which
Czyli
it
ja to
would be
pokazuję
reacting
po to, czy mówię
probably
o tym
if
po to,
Russia had
że
not
wydaje mi się,
shown
że
its
trzeba
power
stosować
in
środki
these
podobne do
Russian-Turkish
tych
relations.
środków,
So I
jakie
think that
stosuje
we should
nasz partner
apply
czy nasz adwersarz.
those
Wydaje mi się, że za
measures that
łagodnie
our
reagowaliśmy na to, co Turcja robiła już wcześniej na Bliskim
applying. So
Wschodzie.
I think we were not
Więc ja
severe
dlatego zgadzam
enough
się z
with
Gerardem, że
Turkey,
tutaj popełniliśmy
taking into
pewien błąd z
consideration
takiej
what
wschodniej
Turkey had
perspektywy
done before.
europejskiej,
So indeed,
że nie
this was a
zrozumieliśmy tej
mistake on
wagi
the
dla
side of
Grecji
the
i Cypru
eastern member states of the European Union,
agresywnego
because we
zachowania
did not
tureckiego. I trzeba było
understand
agresywnie na
what
to
a
również
threat there
odpowiedzieć.
was in Cyprus
Natomiast to nie
and in
znaczy, że
Greece,
teraz nie
and how
jesteśmy właśnie w jakiejś
aggressively
pozycji
Turkey was
negocjacyjnej z Turcją.
actually
To znaczy trzeba coś
behaving.
Turcji
But it
zaoferować.
does not mean
Bo
that we
rzeczywiście
have
ona
no
nie jest w łatwej
negotiating
sytuacji.
power right
Jak
now
zobaczymy na te
with
granice
regard to
morskie
Turkey. Turkey
między
is not in an
Grecją a
easy
Turcją,
situation.
no
If
to
we
tam
look at the
się
sea
prawie nic nie
borders
mieści,
between
prawda?
Turkey
Można wpław
and
pływać
Greece,
od jednego
well,
brzegu do drugiego.
it's
No więc
really
ta
not
granica
much
nigdy nie jest
sea
ustalona,
dividing these two
nie została
countries,
ustalona,
and this
więc tutaj
border
wydaje mi
has
się, trzeba
never been
powrócić do tych
set.
negocjacji
So I think we have to
grecko-tureckich,
go
być
back
może
to these
przymuszając do tego
Turkish-Greek
Turcję jakimś agresywniejszym
negotiations. Maybe we
europejskim
should even
zachowaniem.
force
Te rozmowy
Turkey
grecko-tureckie
to
zostały zawierzone w 2016 roku.
start
Zaoferować Turcji
negotiating on
też
this
udział w tym
again,
East
and we
Med
should
Gas Forum, tak,
also
w tym forum gazowym wschodniego Morza
offer
Śródziemnego.
Turkey
A może nawet
participation in this
powołać czy
East Med Gas
uruchomić
Forum,
mechanizm natowski,
and also we
taki
could apply
dekonfliktujący, bo to
this
są,
NATO
jesteśmy wszyscy
mechanism
akurat
to
Grecja,
decrease
Turcja
the
członkami
conflict,
NATO.
because Turkey
No
and
więc
Greece are
to a
both
propos
member
Turcji, a
states
jeszcze a propos
of
Bliskiego Wschodu,
NATO.
to i też
And
tego,
as
co
far as
powiedział
the Middle
Gerard,
East is
bo
concerned,
zgadzam się, że nie można
I agree with Gerard
ignorować
that
tego
we cannot
faktu, że
just
są
ignore the
bokserzy na
fact
arenie
that there are some
międzynarodowej, prawda?
boxers
I cały
on
czas
the
zachowywać się jak
international arena,
szachista,
and
co
we
wydaje
cannot
się, jak gdyby
behave as if
Europa
we were
robi, czy
playing
Unia
just
Europejska
chess,
robi.
you know, and be so mild
z niesamymi
when the
żądami
other
mamy do
partners
czynienia.
on the
To znaczy,
opponents are
kto jest
boxing.
odbiorcą
However,
europejskiej polityki
who is the
zagranicznej, zadajmy sobie to
receiver of the
pytanie.
European
Nie tylko
foreign
rządy
policy,
są
not
odbiorcą
just the
europejskiej
governments
polityki zagranicznej,
of
ale
different
także, a przede
countries,
wszystkim
but
wydaje mi się,
also
społeczeństwa. jeżeli mówimy o Bliskim Wschodzie. To jest
people who live in those countries, the societies who live in the Middle East. And I think this is maybe the last region of the world that has no democracy. So mostly the countries in the Middle East do not have democracies.
Może się jakoś odnosić również do wschodu w pewnym sensie. Społeczeństwa też patrzą na Unię Europejską, a nawet społeczeństwo rosyjskie patrzy na Unię Europejską. Tutaj jest nasza siła. Naszym odbiorcą nie jest Putin jedynie, nie jest Erdoğan jedynie. To jest ta część społeczeństwa tureckiego, która liczy na Unię Europejską, że ona coś zrobi. To jest ta część społeczeństwa rosyjskiego, która też na to liczy, i arabskich społeczeństw.
And these societies are really counting on us, and by implementing our measures with regards to foreign policy, we have to address those societies too. And there are some processes going on. There were those major protests in Iraq, in Sudan, in Algeria, even in 2019. And these protests are not going to be over soon. So the European Union can play an important role as a symbol, as someone that has never given up some principles which are so important for the European Union. So some wealth in the society, freedom, equality and justice. And I am about to finish, well, I don't have any time left, so.
Powoli chciałbym przesunąć trochę się geograficznie.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to move from the south to the eastern neighborhood of the European Union, and I would like to ask a question about what is going on there. But a lot has been said on foreign policy of the EU and the latest conflict between Greece and Turkey. And I would like to give voice to Jana. Patrycja was saying about being a chess player among boxers in the international arena. And then I thought about Germany. Isn't Germany a chess player that is trying to behave as a chess player, although he's among boxers? And the conflict between Greece and Turkey probably showed two totally different attitudes. The attitude of Germany, the attitude of France, mentioned by Gérard Araud. France sent Navy there and demonstrated a very hard policy and solidarity with the European Union state, while Germany wanted to talk about dialogue, reconciliation, and compromise. Where is Germany in this discussion? And what is this German debate concerning the strategy that is to be applied by Germany? Is it evaluating somehow?
Thank you, Piotr. Please allow me first a footnote to what Gérard has said about the legitimacy of different visions within the EU member states. And I don't want to question that. I think there are different visions, and the strength of the European Union is that kind of we are so diverse, and we bring so many different things to the table. But the EU is very much about compromise, about states moving closer together, adjusting positions in order to speak with one voice and to be more united. And I think that is what we are lacking in EU foreign policy lately. So I think there are too many different visions and too little willingness to compromise. And so while these different visions might be legitimate, I think that brings us nowhere, because there is this famous saying that there are only kind of small states in the European Union and those that don't know yet that they are small. And I deeply believe that this is true, especially vis-a-vis China and the United States. So I think that we don't have a choice here. I mean, of course, Italy and France can have different approaches towards Libya, or Germany and France vis-a-vis Greece and Turkey. Of course, that's possible. It just leads nowhere. It doesn't help us, and it doesn't make us a real player on the international arena. And I think, whereas France might think that it's kind of a big player, I think even France is not capable of dealing with the great powers out there on its own. And I think you can see how much of a difference the EU can make when you look at trade, for example. Kind of when it comes to trade relations, the EU is a unified actor, and look at its weight. So I think while different visions might be legitimate, I would personally like kind of that states reconsider their willingness to work together and not to kind of follow a path because it's not kind of a French or a German path, but to really truly look for compromise and to understand each other better. And I think this is also the key to the German position when it comes to Greece and Turkey. So I think the idea here is that Turkey is a NATO member. It's better to have Turkey within the Western camp than outside the Western camp. Nobody would benefit from having Turkey as an opponent or having an open conflict. So what the Germans, I think, tried to do was to mitigate the conflict, was to try to bring the different actors to the table and to serve as an honest broker, while at the same time our foreign minister has made clear that that's not about equidistance, but this is about kind of finding a compromise and not sending fleets. So I think the foreign policy approach that Germany has is different to the French one or the British one, because we have a broken history, and because our experience with military power is a unique one. And I surely think that Germany, for a long time now, needs to reconsider this and become more active. We have this long debate about Germany taking over more responsibility, and I think there is a lot of homework that the Germans need to do. But I think here we have a structural problem, because Germany very much sees its foreign policy kind of in an EU framework. And the EU as an actor was never designed to be a great power player. It was actually designed to be the opposite of a great power player. It was designed as a counter model to the great power politics that led to the Second World War. So it is on purpose that the EU is as it is right now, and that makes it terribly difficult for the EU to adapt to the new circumstances. And I think this is also to a certain extent true for Germany. So I think, yes, Germany needs to become more French, if you want, with kind of, in many ways when it comes to, kind of being more fit for the 21st century. But at the same time, I think that in Germany, many people rightly say that kind of the military interventions of the past, for example, in Libya, but also now in Africa, have led nowhere. So many people here argue that the Germans have not gotten it wrong 2011 in Libya, and that their opposition towards this military intervention was justified by everything that followed from that. So while I personally am in the internal German debate always opposing this position, I think there is some truth to that, that kind of we still, as Germans and as Europeans, have to find a way how to deal with the challenges of the 21st century and how to speak that language of power that Josep Borrell asked us to learn. So my question is, what kind of language would that be? I don't want the EU to speak the American language. I don't want them to speak the Chinese language. I want them to develop their own language, because the EU is different and the EU has different strength. So I don't want to see kind of the EU now intervening all over militarily or kind of bribe, I don't know, American dictators or bully allies. So I think the challenge here is to find a maybe more robust answer, but still a very European answer. And I think this is what Germany is discussing right now. I take every critique that the Germans don't spend enough on defense, that they are not leading enough. and all of this. But so I think some of the other models that we see in the European Union when it comes to foreign policy are not very convincing either.
Dziękuję, Jana. Ja myślę, że ty podniosłaś kilka niezwykle ważnych...
Jana, I think you raised lots of important issues, and I think that Patrycja and Gerard would like to refer to this. And one of them is the issue of German foreign policy. But I hope that Ambassador Araud will be eager to comment on the French expectations towards Germany with this regard. So, what kind of Germany would be a desired partner from the perspective of France when it comes to shaping the European Union's foreign and security policy? But you also mentioned the issue of language narrative of power. What language should the EU speak in the international arena? And during the next part of our debate, I would like us to get back to this issue. But let me also ask Ambassador Araud a question concerning Russia. We were talking about a vacuum left by the United States. And this vacuum is being filled with Turkey and Russia. And we can feel this in the EU. And we are quite skeptical in Poland towards the efforts of Emmanuel Macron concerning the talks about the new security architecture with Russia, and the belief that these talks and dialogue with Russia can bring us anything. And I would like to ask you about your comment, your perspective on the Macron strategy towards Russia, mostly in the context of what you've said during your first part of this debate, the language of power, the language of strength, and the balance of power is what's most important in the international world. And you also said that we cannot count on the US right now. So the question is, in what way can the EU use the language of power without the US? And are we really a partner in this debate? Are we on equal footing, really? And can we dictate any conditions to Russia? Can we expect these talks to bring any results?
Thank you. We could have a long conversation because a lot of issues are on the table. I agree with a lot of what Jana said. Really, the question is, first, let's be frank. I have negotiated dozens of texts in the European Union. When you try to have a common position, most of the time you go to the lowest common denominator. You know, that's the result. So in Greece, and if we had gone to the European Union, the result would have been a bland communique about the need of dialogue. You know, it's so it's not making. You're perfectly right. The European Union will not become a military power, sending its GIs everywhere, but it has really. It should have a more, I should say, realistic vision of the world. But you're right. We have to find also. It's very important. We are not going to become, and I think it's a major line in what you said. We shouldn't become the US and China. We are representing also another vision of international life, and that's the question mark. How to transmit this vision without becoming basically, as I've said, an herbivore among carnivores. So how to have the language of Europe. We are Europeans, we are different, we have values, and not being seen as a naive Scandinavian. I love Scandinavians, by the way. As for Russia, no, first, you know, it's very typical of what I was saying about the fact that we have different geographies and different histories. So for a French man, talking to Russia is something which is absolutely, there is nobody on the political stage in France who will object to it. You know, really, Russia has been our ally in the last 2 world wars. You know, that's a fact. So I do understand that seen from the Baltic states, seen from Warsaw, the history is much more tragic, and it's quite different. You know, so that here we need on both sides, we need some, I don't know, some psychological adjustment, or also trusting the other side. When what I read about France in Poland, for instance, you know, nobody apparently noticed that France has taken part in all the military forces, deployments in Poland and in the Baltic states within NATO. We have always been there. And having a dialogue with Russia doesn't mean caving in to Russian demands. Simply, we have to talk to Russia. The world is a jungle. You don't have a judge or a policeman. Diplomacy is talking to your enemy. You know, it's always been the case. France is not negotiating with Belgium. We are negotiating with our enemies, with the bad guys. And it doesn't mean that you have, again, to yield to the pressure of the bad guys. You have to see whether it's possible to reach a compromise with the bad guys. And I think that we can conclude that after 3 or 4 years of Macron's efforts to talk with Russians, Russia has not shown any availability to reach a mutually acceptable compromises on, I should say, the issue of common concerns, which are, I should say, first, Ukraine, secondly, Syria, and third, the incredible behavior of the Russian secret services on the territory of our member states. But I think that we should, I personally, I advise the president to do it. He was right to do it. And it would be right to keep a channel open to Russia. Again, foreign policy is to talk to your enemy. Maybe we have not been reassuring enough with the Baltic partners and Poland. But at the same time, let's be frank, you are Polish. You know, whatever you say about Russia, there is immediately in Poland a very, very instinctive reaction. So I should say that's an issue where it's very difficult not to be emotional and to try to trust the other side. But I think, and if you look objectively to what was the discussion between France and Russia, at no point you can consider that France has sacrificed the interest of anybody, but we were talking to the Russians. The problem was at some point that nobody was talking to the Russians. You can say the Russians are responsible of that, but with the end of the Obama era, but also with the domestic problems of Trump, the Americans didn't have any channel open to Russia. So why not to try and to talk with the Russians, and let's keep open the channel. You know, that's diplomacy. But at the same time, you have also, again, to keep the balance of power. And that's the reason why France has sent its planes and also its soldiers, actually, to the Baltic states. And right now, you have French soldiers in the Baltic states. That's the way foreign policy should be conducted. Unfortunately, most of our interlocutors on the international scene are thugs, are dictators. But that's the world as it is.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie ambasadorze.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Ambassador. And now I would like to address Patrycja. I think there are many topics you would like to refer to, and I would like to add one more. This is something you mentioned yourself, being unanimous when taking decisions on foreign policy in the European Union. This is a topic that coming back. So what is the nature of the European Union as an institution that consists of many parts? So it's a body consisting of many parts, so it's very difficult to have this unity. So maybe we could have this principle of voting. So we would not demand unanimity. We could just vote, at least in some issues related to foreign policy. And Ursula von der Leyen mentioned this herself when she was giving her speech in September this year. Maybe this is the right direction for the European Union to take. What do you think?
Piotrze, czy pozwolisz mi dosłownie w kilku zdaniach odnieść się do Gerarda po angielsku?
Sentences in English
I would
to
like to
address
make sure
Gerard.
that I'm being understood correctly. I completely agree with what Gérard Araud has just said. And I think if it was presented the way you presented it, to have an open contact and an open line with Moscow, it wouldn't be taken the way it was in this part of Europe. But what we heard was that the goal of President Macron was to establish a cooperation on very sensitive issues, on exchange of intelligence and on cybersecurity, which is exactly where Russia is menacing us. So in that sense, the narrative, I think, was false and it wasn't there. But the way you presented it is, I subscribe to each and every sentence that you've reiterated. A w odpowiedzi na twoje pytanie, Piotrze, o jednomyślność w Unii Europejskiej i polityce zagranicznej. No więc oczywiście ta jednomyślność blokuje działanie, bo nie pozwala tak szybko zareagować, jak chcielibyśmy, żeby Unia Europejska działała. Widzieliśmy to w przypadku Białorusi 5 tygodni po wydarzeniach, po rozpoczęciu protestów i po wyborach prezydenckich. Ciągle nie mogliśmy się zgodzić na głupią listę 40 nazwisk Białorusinów, którzy się mieli znaleźć na tej liście sankcyjnej, ponieważ Cypr blokował. Więc tak, to jest jeden tylko z przykładów. Inny przykład w ubiegłym roku w lutym, prawda, zdaje się w jeden dzień Włochy zablokowały decyzję w sprawie Wenezueli, państwa spoza NATO w Unii Europejskiej zablokowały decyzję na temat traktatu INF i jeszcze zdaje się w tym samym czasie Polska i Węgry zablokowały jakieś tam oświadczenie Unii Europejskiej z Ligą Państw Arabskich, bo coś nie pasowało w sprawie migracji. No więc tak, to jest ogromnie frustrujące i Komisja ma tę propozycję, żeby głosować kwalifikowaną większością, czyli 55% państw, które reprezentują 65% populacji. I żeby to najpierw wprowadzić w trzech dziedzinach, czyli sankcje, kwestie dotyczące praw człowieka
with regard to human rights sanctions,
zdaje się,
I don't remember
trzeciej dziedziny, ale gdzieś, gdzie to nie może, misje zagraniczne, zdaje się. W ogóle chyba w misjach to jest niemożliwe. No w każdym razie sankcje, to by było ważne, gdyby została wprowadzona
with regard to sanctions, if we could have this qualified majority voting, so it would be easier, much easier for us to impose sanctions. And I can see that this is justified. However, I am afraid of some development. So let's take a look who is blocking this voting. Some smaller countries afraid of being dominated by bigger countries. There are also some countries governed by the so-called sovereignists, so those who believe that the European Union is taking their sovereignty away from them, from the national state, because they see, they understand sovereignty in an old fashion that is more typical of the 19th century and not the 20th or 21st century.
No i wreszcie państwa też te, które mają jakieś szczególne interesy inwestycyjne z Chinami, z Rosją, te też obawiają się tej większościowej kwalifikowanej No i jakie tutaj jest zagrożenie? To znaczy, jednak jest pewna wartość w wykuwaniu się tego wspólnego stanowiska. prawda? Bo jeżeli mieliśmy taki impas jak w przypadku Białorusi i Cypr blokował decyzję, to jednak za każdym razem na cotygodniowym spotkaniu ministrów spraw zagranicznych ten temat był podnoszony, państwa wstawały i mówiły, jakie są ich racje. To jest moim zdaniem ważny proces i proces też, którego nie rozumieją, zauważyłam inne państwa poza Unią Europejską, że my mamy, oni się cały czas spotykają, oni się cały czas regularnie co tydzień prawie że spotykają i mówią, jakie mają opinie. To jest ważne, więc ja chcę tutaj podkreślić jedno, że uważam, że docelowo jak najbardziej powinniśmy występować jako jedno, jakieś państwo federalne, które potrafi szybko i aktywnie działać, ale to musi być pewien proces, do którego w którymś momencie dojrzejemy. Pewnie presja przyjdzie od dołu, od społeczeństwa, bo już większość Europejczyków jest za tym, żeby Unia Europejska odgrywała większą rolę w polityce zagranicznej i jako jedno, prawda, miała bardziej rozbudowaną tą politykę zagraniczną wspólnotową. Widzę tutaj ogromną Rosję, ogromną rolę Niemiec i Francji, bo
Germany and France could play a very important role here, because we have also these conflicts between France and Germany, and they seem to be the most important ones. If France and Germany assured the smaller countries, which are now afraid of this qualified majority voting, that they understood their perspective, which is of course subject to change as well, because the interests are subject to change. Also in foreign policy issues, when governments change, for example, so when Salvini would have different interests than Conte, and Le Pen and Macron have different interests too. So it very much depends on what kind of government the member state has. However, we need the signal, I think. This was mentioned by Jana or Gerard, I don't remember. So those smaller countries need this reassurance, need this message that their perspective is being understood and taken into consideration. So we could have this qualified majority voting, however, we would still keep presenting our arguments and talking about them. Thank you. I think Jana wants to refer to this problem of voting and also to the European policy when it comes to Russia, presenting the German perspective. So this might be very, very interesting. And also, it would be nice to hear what your thoughts are on the French perspective. However, there are some questions from the audience. Banash Brandt is asking on YouTube, and this is a question that goes to Jana. The European Union global strategy proposed by Federica Mogherini, and this global strategy was supposed to ensure that the European Union would have this clear profile of an international player. And to what extent has this been successful? This is the question from the audience. So Jana, if you could answer this question as well. I can see that Gerard has left us for some time. This was not planned, but I hope he will be able to join us again soon. And for now, let's just keep discussing our topic, just the three of us. So Jana, voice over to you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Yeah, I wanted to make two quick comments on France and Russia and on QMV. And it's a shame that Gérard has dropped out. I think his internet connection is simply not working. So, because the French narrative on Russia, oh, now there he is again. Wonderful, welcome back. I was just starting to comment on your comments on Russia, because it is, from a German perspective, This is actually a bit bizarre because the Germans have been the ones arguing forever and ever that we need to keep channels with Russia open, that we need to have dialogue with Russia, that we need to keep talking, that kind of there is no security in Europe without Russia. And these have been German lines forever. And Germany got a lot of criticism for that, and rightly so, I think, because sometimes it seemed from a German perspective, kind of that the German aim was to have dialogue for dialogue's sake. And I think that's also something you can now ask the French about, because of course we need to talk to Russia, but at least from a German perspective, I mean, Mrs. Merkel has been talking to President Putin constantly ever since 2014. There was never a pause. They have been they have been constantly on speaking terms, and I think there were a lot of phone calls and meetings going on. So I think at least the Germans, but I think also in the Normandy format, so there was conversation with Russia going on. And I can understand, and I think it's absolutely necessary. It would be a big mistake to cut channels. But the question to me is, what should this dialogue be about? It's not about the talking, it's about the content. So what are we talking about? Because I think dialogue just for dialogue's sake is not really an aim in itself. So what is on the table and what is negotiable, and where can you reach compromise? Because of course reaching compromise is a good thing, but then what are you ready to sacrifice or to give up in order to do that? And I think, Gerard, you have said that from Russia, I mean, it became very obvious that they were not ready to put anything on the table and to make any compromise and step forward. And I think as long as we have this position that kind of Russia is where it is and it's not moving, I think it just does not make sense to talk about the easing of sanctions and to have this kind of this idea of kind of these islands of cooperation. Of course, we can try to do this, but I think, that is the question. And there, France has not been. I think it's wonderful that you made that point, because I think France has not been very transparent and open vis-a-vis Poland and the Baltic states and explained what it wanted to achieve. But still, to me, I mean, the things that Macron has put on the table to discuss with Russia were very questionable. But this might be, that's just my personal German perspective. And on QMV, I understand that this would be a step forward. It would prevent foreign actors to cultivate Trojan horses within the European Union, and there are a lot of benefits, but there are also a lot of problems. I think it's not only about the small countries that are afraid that their position will not be respected. It's also, there is this huge potential that this would drive a further wedge within the European Union. Just think of QMV and the migration debate. I mean, that was not really productive and helpful. And I think the EU was not better off after QMV was implemented. And I think I just warn everybody, at least in the German debate, this whole QMV discussion has become kind of like, this is the silver bullet. The moment we have implemented QMV, we will have a functioning European foreign policy. And I think that is simply not the case because of all the points that Gerard has said in the beginning, why kind of we don't have it by now in the first place. This is not an institutional problem. This is a political problem. And so it's not a silver bullet. It will be applicable only to a limited number of cases. And most of the issues will be decided kind of by soft law and unanimity, even in the future. So don't make this a silver bullet. I think this is what we've done in the EU so often. Kind of once we have the EAS in place, it will be functioning. Once we have the High Representative kind of beefed up, all the reforms done in the Lisbon Treaty. So I think we have been thinking like this forever. Once we have done this or institutionalized that or created this position, it is not about that. I think this is just not the biggest problem. So when it comes to the EU global strategy, I think it's outdated. I think it was worthwhile writing it back then in 2016, but actually the very moment it was published, it was already kind of outdated because of Brexit and then the election of Donald Trump. So I think it's a wonderful document. I think it's very thought through, and Natalie Tocci has done a brilliant job, but it's not really giving guidance for the 21st century as we see it now, because it's not answering the question what to do with the United Kingdom and how to deal with the fact that kind of one of the two big military powers is leaving the EU framework and is not interested in engaging with us in the future in an EU framework. And so I think we need to, I would have preferred Borrell to push for a new strategy and to revise this one, but he hasn't done this. But so now there is this idea of the strategic compass, which is the link between the global strategy, which is pretty abstract, and kind of force planning, capability development, and all this. And so the strategic compass is supposed to be the missing link. And although institutions and strategies and papers don't solve the problems, I think there is some hope here that this whole process could be very beneficial. First of all, because it's one of the rare Franco-German projects in EU defense that are kind of agreed or supported by both sides equally. And because if we really manage to have a better understanding what we want EU defense basically for, I think that would be a huge progress, because paradoxically, although we have this policy area for a long time now, there is actually until this day not a clear understanding what EU defense, what should be the purpose, kind of what should be the goals, the aims, all of this. So I think, but it's in the end, it's just another strategy, and it brings me back to QMV and everything. It's up to the member states to really do something. And I think last sentence, if we don't manage to do that in an EU framework, we will see more and more coalitions of the willing outside the EU framework. And something that France has done a lot when it comes to military interventions, Strait of Hormuz, just one example. And I think this is what will be unavoidable in order to have at least some European member states cooperating on foreign policy issues.
Dziękuję, Jana. I znowu poruszyłaś wiele wątków i na pewno...
Thank you, Jana. Again, you've raised lots of interesting issues, and Ambassador Araud will be certainly willing to touch up on them. And I would like to mention one more thing. You mentioned Trump for the first time, somewhat between the words, which is interesting because the idea of European geopolitical sovereignty is somehow linked to what's going on in the US, what's going on with the European foreign policy. And right now we are 3 weeks ahead before crucial events in the US. There will be a dedicated discussion under the World in Focus, but this will be after the elections, and I would like to encourage you all to take part in the discussion. But I think we should talk about this today as well. There are lots of issues to be raised by Mr. Araud. But also, what about the geopolitical union after elections? What will happen to the European Union? What will be the place of the EU after the elections, depending on scenario? What are your expectations? What are your ideas?
I think never since 1932, with the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we have seen such antagonistic visions of between the two candidates. So I think that whether Trump is reelected or not makes a major difference. Major difference. We know what is the vision of the world of Trump, and he will go to the end of the road. You know, alliances don't matter. He has said publicly that he will launch a trade war with the European Union. He is against multilateralism. It will be for the Europeans a major wake-up call. It's not excluded even that actually he could really put an end to NATO. He will feel totally justified by his re-election. He's not a guy to make any compromise. He has very strong convictions, whatever is the basis of these convictions, but he's not going to give them up. And nobody around him is going to influence him. So it will be a major problem of really basically this time a world of a jungle where the United States will join actually the other predators. What will be the reaction of the European Union? I don't know. I'm not even sure that actually the European Union will remain united. I don't know what Hungary, and I'm really sorry, I don't know what Poland will do if Trump is re-elected and if Trump is adopting what he has always said, an aggressive, antagonistic policy against the European Union. If Biden is re-elected, Europeans are immediately going to scream and to really say, and he will come and he will pat the shoulders of the European leaders and it will be orgasmic. But actually, we have to be aware that we are not going to go to business as usual. Obama had started it, Trump has going on. There is a huge fatigue in the American public opinion for interventionism, external interventionism. In other words, the Americans are not going to send the GIs in Ukraine, in Syria, or in Libya, and our environment will remain in flames, and maybe the Americans will try political mediation, but nothing more. So I think it will be, in any case, for Europeans really to say, what are we going to do considering our environment? But I think what is more important is that if Biden is elected, we the Europeans, define a new transatlantic agenda with the Americans. There are a lot of issues which are not, in a sense, the traditional geopolitical issues we were referring to, and issues which, for me, actually, are maybe more important to the future of Europe, of the humankind, that we have to work together with the Americans. If we don't work together with the Americans, it will be the Chinese model which will impose itself. So I'm talking about, of course, environment, but I'm talking also about trade. Free trade, as we have conceived it for the last 40 years, is dead. The public opinions everywhere are telling us. So what does mean free trade, which is quite important? The governance of internet, the artificial intelligence, the ethics of the artificial intelligence, the cryptocurrencies, which are developing very quickly. So there are a lot of different issues which are, in a sense, civilizations issue. We are the same civilization with the Americans, and so we should expand, widen what is the transatlantic agenda so far. Again, NATO is important, so okay. But there are so many different issues, and I should say that the European Union, as a regulatory power, has a great trade and economic power, in a sense, should volunteer and go to Washington, D.C. on the 21st of January, telling the Americans, let's work together. We have a lot of different issues. Some of them, actually, we could be in collision. For instance, the treatment of the taxation of the high-tech companies. If we don't work together, there will be a collision. So again, I think that we have two totally different scenarios. The first one is a disaster. And again, I don't know how the Europeans will react. The second one, let's not dream about going back to the old world, about the American protection and so on. But it means also that we have to show imagination, creativity. And again, that's something, I know that imagination and creativity are not the main qualities of the European Union, but that's something where we have a lot of things to say and to bring to the table.
Dziękuję bardzo. Patrycja, jak ty widzisz?
Thank you. Patrycja, what's your view on the future of transatlantic relations after the elections in our part of Europe in the context of cooperation on security matters? The relations with Trump were not that bad? What can we expect after the election?
Więc poprosiliście mnie, Piotrze, żebym mówiła po angielsku, bo mamy jakiś problem z tłumaczeniem mojego polskiego na angielski dla współrozmówców. So I will speak in English, but this is not in disrespect to the Polish viewer, but out of necessity. Right, so Poland, when it comes to Trump, did relatively well, but it didn't come at a price. And this is obvious for this Polish government and would be probably for any government. And, you know, in honest honesty, I'm not sure if there was any other government in Poland, they would have done things differently, perhaps with a different style and different narrative. But this focus on the US has been clear since early 90s. And I completely concur again with what Gérard Araud has said. So I'm trying to reflect if I'm taking the French view or it's still some kind of a version of a Polish view. But I agree that, you know, there are two camps of people who think about what will happen in those coming American elections. And there's this camp that says it's going to be the same, whoever wins, right? I mean, the style will be different, again, the language will be different, but the directions and the processes are more or less the same. And then there's the camp, I think that Gerard is in. I wonder about Jana, but I am surely in this other camp that says, no, it will make a difference, okay? It will make a foreign policy difference. It will not only be a matter of style or narrative if Biden wins. I mean, of course, we can find consolation in the fact that in 2024, it's going to be the end of Trump, right? And there will be no third Trump term, but it's a weak consolation. So I do believe that things will change when Biden is elected, because he will make an effort to mend ties with Europe. This is pretty obvious. Maybe it will be Germany first. So maybe Poland will take a hit, you know, because of the closeness with Trump. We don't know that yet. But maybe not. I think, after all, it's an asset for Poland in a way that we've managed through any administration to keep good relations. Surely it would have been better if it didn't come at a cost of maybe worsening relations within the EU. But it is some kind of an asset. I also agree that transatlantic relations will have to be redefined at the same time. They need to be more partner-like. You know, I'm sure that we've all experienced, I mean, ourselves, but also we've seen in foreign policy how asymmetric the relations with the US can be, even German-American relations. I think the Americans also need to understand, and I hope they do now, that there are things that we need to cooperate on, and there is no other way. And that is the position vis-a-vis China, and here all the issues with free trade that Gerard mentioned come in. This is climate change, of course, and this is cybersecurity. And again, of course, AI, space policies. The EU has just adapted a new space policy strategy, which also has this American component in it. And then security, of course. Stronger European security cannot come at a cost of a strong NATO partnership. And I don't see it as a zero-sum game. I mean, I don't see any competition between stronger European capabilities and a stronger NATO. This is the same. Stronger Europe means stronger NATO. And I am counting on Biden, and I hope he will do it, to come out and say, yes, we need stronger European security. You guys go forward with your projects and you become stronger. And we will meet the 2% threshold at some point of the spending, but the US will need to show a more partner-like position towards Europe. And also it has to do about I think the way we will deal with recovery, how well we will recover after COVID, how well Europe will be able to show that it's still capable of meeting the goals that it set for itself, and specifically the green transition, a digital transformation, and also, by the way, still giving people the welfare that they expect, right? If this is the outcome, the positive outcome, then I think, and Biden wins, then I think the future does not look so bleak. Yeah, perhaps I'll stop here. I will have a word to say maybe about Poland later on if there's still time. That's it.
Dziękuję Patrycja
Thank you, Patrycja. And now the same question will go to Jana. So the future, maybe not with regard to the transatlantic alliance, but the European sovereignty. So the political union, even after Biden wins. You wrote a very interesting article on that was published on our website. An article saying that even if Biden wins, which seems quite realistic now, there is this threat that Europeans will say that we'll go back to business as usual, unlike Ambassador Araud was saying. So everything will be fine, and all these efforts towards more sovereignty and a larger engagement of Europeans will not be needed. So how realistic is this threat? What do you think?
So I think we have the perfect example of a functioning Weimar triangle here, and about huge convergence. I subscribe basically to everything that Gérard has said and Patrycja has reinforced. I think it's not an either-or camp, the two camps that Patrycja mentioned. I think both camps exist, or both kind of theories. So I think there is a structural shift in US foreign policy that predates Donald Trump, started under Obama, and will outlive Trumpism and the Trump presidency. And this is kind of what Gérard mentioned, the shift to Asia, the intervention fatigue, the focus on domestic issues, the narrow focus on America's interest when it comes to conducting foreign policy. So all that, I think, is structural and it's not that much linked to the president. But of course, the person makes a huge difference when it comes to giving multilateralism a chance or not. Kind of working through international institutions. So I think it's a total game changer, and it's the most important American election for all of us that I can think of. So, but the problem is, and I wrote about this in my piece, so the question is, how would the Europeans react to a Biden presidency? Because I think that I support everything that Gérard said, and I hope that the Europeans will be active or proactive, will present something, they will offer cooperation on China and make concrete proposals and all of this. I just fear that the Europeans, and for that matter, precisely my country, that we don't have fully understood kind of the structural changes that will remain, and what that means for us, that Europe is not in the center of American attention, it's in the periphery, that we really, really, really need to get our act together. And so I'm just afraid that many will consider a Biden presidency a sleeping pill for efforts for more European sovereignty, and that they will see Biden as kind of some sort of Obama 3. And I think there is this danger that a lot of people think, oh, the transatlantic relationship was basically functioning under Obama and everything was fine, and we just need to go back to that. Even though you hear all over Berlin, kind of, there is no back to normal. And of course, we need to renew the transatlantic relationship. But I think that we are not prepared how substantially things need to change when it comes to territorial defense and the role of the Europeans within NATO, but also or even more so when it comes to crisis management in our periphery. I think a situation like in Libya 2011, when kind of the Brits and the French, after 3 days max, ran out of munition and capabilities, and the US came to their rescue. I think this is just not going to happen any longer. So the whole point about kind of the Europeans being more capable to take care of their own security will remain on the table. And also, as I said, Biden makes a huge difference, but nobody knows what comes after that. Nobody knows how long. I mean, Biden is very old, and you see that in the election campaign. And you don't know how long he will stick around and who is next. And there will be another Republican president for sure. And so I have recently heard a Republican telling me, so the Germans need to be very careful that they cannot only work with Republican presidents, and that because we had this trouble with George W. Bush, now with Donald Trump, and I think that is not a possibility. So we need to be able also to find our way back to working with the Republicans. I hope that the Republican Party will change again and not be that Trump fan club any longer, and will renew itself in opposition as well. But so I think there is a lot of homework to do. But so I hope that Gerard's projection of us doing more enough about the offer just comes true, and that we don't take the sleeping pill and push the snooze button.
Dziękuję bardzo, Jana. My się zbliżamy do końca.
Thank you, Jana. We are now approaching the end of our debate, but we still have some 5 minutes left, and there is one more question from the audience, from Wojciech Kos. He is asking whether we can hope for a reaction of the European Union after Navalny was poisoned. Angela Merkel was suggesting some consequences for Nord Stream 2. And do you think that imposing sanctions on the Belarusian on important people from Belarus, do you think that this reaction is enough in your opinion? Maybe you could answer these 2 questions, and then Jana will also be able to say a few words about Nord Stream 2. So maybe let's start with Mr. Araud. So what's your assessment of this reaction of the European Union, and then do you think that anything else will come?
I will answer in a more general way about sanctions. And I know that here, once more, I am on the unpopular side of the debate. But to be frank, as a diplomat, I consider that sanctions are very often a fig leaf on our inability of having a real foreign policy. We are imposing dozens of sanctions everywhere. You know, we have layers of sanctions. You know, I think that 50 countries are under European sanctions, and I don't know when actually it has been effective. Look at Crimea, the annexation of Crimea. You know, we have sanctioned the Russians, and Russia is not going to give back Crimea, and these sanctions are going to, in a sense, to die slowly. You know, because they are being implementing, but in 5 years, people will forget it. So it's, to be frank, all these sanctions, you know, sanctioning Belarusian leaders, what is the result of, what is the goal? Foreign policy is to try to change the reality. It's not saying, oh, you're a bad guy, I punish you. We are not into punishing bad guys. We are trying to change policies. So I know at the same time that we have a public opinion. We are obliged to do something. And since we don't know what to do, okay, sanctions. But as a specialist of foreign policy, I think we should keep in mind that this multiplication, really, it's really, frankly, I think people, as a former perm rep to the United Nations, I can tell you there are scores of regimes of sanctions, and most of them are not implementing, and nearly of them actually are not effective. So I wanted simply to raise this issue. Really, is sanction really a real policy?
Dziękuję bardzo i krótko.
Thank you. And now, Patrycja,
sure.
Briefly.
I wonder if not sanctions, then what? So
that's a good question.
What's the proposition? You know, I think that Russians and actually many other people like to travel to the EU. So travel sanctions are not a fig leaf only. and they have assets in European banks, they have assets in European capital, they have capital in European real estate, you name it. So there is a possibility of really biting sanctions. These sanctions are not biting, but they are better than nothing. So I wonder what else France would propose, and should have proposed, if not these sanctions that you disagree with, so or you are against. So just that on this thing, I want to touch on Jana's point about mending ties with the Republicans. I'm not entirely sure if you were addressing or referring to the German foreign policy or all EU policy, because I think we, on a whole, have relatively good relations also with the Republicans. Surely the Republicans are the type of McCain Republicans, and there are the Trump Republicans. So there are at least two camps, to make it simplistic. But it's the same thing on the Democratic side. I mean, we're going pretty okay with Biden and, you know, Clinton type of Republicans. But what about Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez type of Republicans? I think there's a lot of work to do on European part there as well.
Dziękuję, Patrycja. I ostatnie słowo.
Thank you, Patrycja. And now the last word will belong to Jana, who is supposed to cover Nord Stream 2 as well.
Yeah, but I spoke about the Germans and their kind of very strained relationship with Republicans, with George W. Bush and Trump, and not about Europeans in general. Just one word about sanctions. I think they were instrumental in stopping Russia from further kind of land grabs in Ukraine. I think they have been, I mean, they haven't brought Crimea back or anything, but I think that they had some benefit, and I think that I hope that they are not slowly dying. I think they have been more robust and resistant than I thought. They have been declared dead many times. They are still there because actually, I think if you take them away now, that's just rewarding the Russians, and kind of you would take them away for nothing. I think you cannot do this. And on Nord Stream 2, and I think the question was about, is there change? Is there hope? And I think there isn't, actually. I was so hopeful after the Navalny poisoning, and so for some weeks there was this atmosphere of change in the air, that there was this strong statement from Angela Merkel. The candidates for CDU chairman, two of them advocated either to terminate the project or to have this moratorium, while one of them said no, continue. But now all that has become silent again. And I think we have a de facto moratorium, but because of the American sanctions and secondary sanctions, and not because of kind of a conscious decision by the Germans. And I think that these voices that have been pushing that much have been silenced. And yeah, so I'm actually a bit disappointed. I thought that we would reach much more on Nord Stream 2, and we haven't.
Dziękuję bardzo, Jana. Ja myślę, że jeśli chodzi o...
Thank you, Jana. As far as Nord Stream 2 is concerned, I think we are just as disappointed as you are in Poland. And well, it is, after all, a disappointment that has been discussed now towards the end of our debate, but I hope the debate as such has not been a disappointment for you, and there are still more debates to come. On Thursday, the next one at 4 p.m. we'll be discussing the European culture of protest. So you are very much invited to join us. Please visit our website, where you can find the program and also some information on the topics we are going to debate and our guests. So thank you very much, Patrycja Sasnal, Gérard Araud, and Jana Puglierin from Gérard Arnold is now in New York, Jana Puglierin is in Berlin, and Patrycja is in Warsaw. Thank you very much.